Hey folks, this is Stef from Infinite Combo bringing you this month's episode of Deckheads with a Commander's spotlight on Marchesa the Black Rose. If you didn't catch Goggin's Sliver Overlord in January, this is a series where we run you through the ins and outs of our favorite EDH or Commander decks. So, Marchesa is a 3/3 human wizard for 4 mana with a black, blue, and red color identity. She does 3 things. First, she has Dethrone, an effect that gives her a +1/+1 counter whenever she attacks a player with the highest or tied for the highest life total. Second, she gives other creatures you control Dethrone, so same effect. And third, when a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it dies, she returns it to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. And yes, that does include herself. So she was definitely one of the most sought-after creatures in Conspiracy due to her massive potential as an EDH general, and naturally she is now among the most popular ones in the community. Last September they got me this foil copy, which was about $100, so yay. Nice birthday present. So my Marchesa deck started out as what I guess you could call a +1/+1 counter good stuff deck. So beyond getting counters on things and giving bonuses and buffs to those things, there wasn't really exactly a theme to it. But then Rob remembered the existence of Arcbound creatures and got the idea to make it an artifact-themed deck. And not only do many of them work well with Marchesa's color and ability, but being colorless, they cut out a great deal of the color-fixing issues found in some tricolor decks. So let's talk about the most current build now. Something I'll say about this deck right off the bat is that it suffers from what I call 99 card slot syndrome. So in every EDH deck, of course, you have to have one commander and exactly 99 other cards. But I find myself constantly coming across new cards saying, oh, that would be so good in Marchesa. So narrowing down my deck picks to just 99 is an ongoing struggle. In the land base, for example, I have 11 basic lands. 4 islands, 3 mountains, and 4 swamps. There's so many good non-basic utility lands that would work well in place of these, but Solemn Simulacrum just works too well as an answer to Mana Screw to cut these out. So, of course, I also fetch these with Scalding Tarn, Bloodstained Mire, and Polluted Delta. The Zendikar and Khans fetches, in addition to the Shock lands and Pain lands, are extra useful in this deck because of the recurring theme here with inflicting small amounts of damage to myself, or the Suicide archetype, in order to get Dethrone triggers when they're not readily available. There's the classic Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth, and Filth combo. Opal Palace is a must for any commander deck, but especially for Marchesa. And finally, the red, blue, and black artifact lands. So Great Furnace, Seat of the Synod, Vault of Whispers. So those are the highlights of my 37-card land base, so let's move on to the creatures and combos that really give this deck its bite. I also have 6 mana rocks for extra ramp. When a game starts out and I'm looking at an opening hand for this deck, one of the best possible things that I can see is Extruder and a lower cost Arcbound creature. This is a great way to get Marchesa counters early game, so if she dies, she's able to bring herself back thanks to her ability, that keeps the mana cost from stacking up every time she dies. This deck does kind of rely on her to become truly threatening, so having at least one counter on her at any moment is important. What you do is sacrifice the Arcbound creature to Extruder, which allows you to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, in this case Marchesa. The Arcbound creature is able to pass its counters to another artifact creature when it dies, so you can put them on Extruder. This way you can sacrifice him to himself on each of your upkeeps instead of paying his echo cost. And the Arcbound creature, of course, will be back at my end step complete with its counters. Because of how Marchesa's ability works, I can do this once a turn, so the more players there are at the table, the more counters I can spread around to my creatures before it actually becomes my turn again. Speaking of good ways to get +1/+1 counters on Marchesa that don't involve attacking, there's also Unspeakable Symbol. It's an enchantment that allows you to pay 3 life and put a +1/+1 counter on one of your creatures. Normally this card isn't that good, but in a deck like this where you want to have the lowest life total, it's actually pretty handy. So obviously the early game benefit here is twofold. You can give yourself access to dethrone triggers by damaging yourself while making Marchesa hit harder and capable of bringing yourself back if she's destroyed. There's also Blade of the Bloodchief, which puts a +1/+1 counter on equipped creature every time any creature at all goes to the graveyard, or 2 +1/+1 counters if the equipped creature is a vampire. Marchesa, of course, isn't a vampire, but that's nothing I can't change with Olivia Voldaren. And side note, I'm also thinking about getting the new Olivia from Shadows over Innistrad, because she can also turn things into vampires and really would synergize well with this deck. Since Marchesa brings stuff back from the graveyard easily, I have a lot of sacrifice effects and board wipes, and that can allow Blade of the Bloodchief to get out of hand incredibly fast, especially in a multiplayer game. So let's go back to the Arcbound creatures for a moment, because aside from Marchesa, they're kind of the foundation of this deck. So Arcbound creatures are 0/0 creatures with the keyword ability Modular. Modular says this creature comes into play with a set number of +1/+1 counters, and when they go to the graveyard, its controller may move its counters onto another target artifact creature. So with Marchesa in play, these creatures allow you to spread +1/+1 counters all over your board, as long as it consists mostly of artifacts. A couple of these, like Arcbound Worker and Arcbound Stinger, make really great draw engines when paired with Skullclamp. There we go, Skullclamp. Baleful Strix is another powerful potential draw engine when paired with Master Transmuter or Marchesa and a +1/+1 counter and a sacrifice effect. Phyrexian Arena is also a must for any black deck with a soft suicide theme, and Chasm Skulker is there to benefit from all those extra draw sources. Speaking of draw, Thoughtcast naturally fits in well here as it has affinity for artifacts, allowing you to potentially draw 2 cards for 1 mana. Mycosynth Golem and Assert Authority are 2 other cards that work well here due to affinity for artifacts and the sheer number of artifacts in my deck. I also have a number of ways that I can search my library for answers in a pinch, which is especially important when your deck relies heavily on your commander. Thanks again to Master Transmuter and Marchesa's ability to recur creatures with +1/+1 counters, Sphinx Summoner is a great way to search for an artifact, as are Kuldotha Forgemaster and Tezzeret the Seeker. If I need something that's not an artifact, well, there's always Demonic Tutor, of course. But if you want to know the ultimate search effect for this deck, look no further than Sidisi Undead Vizier. She's a 4/6 for 5 mana with Death Touch and Exploit, and the latter allows you to sacrifice a creature you control when she comes into play. And if you do so, you can do what Demonic Tutor does, which is search your library for any card and put it into your hand. The reason she's better than Demonic Tutor here is A, she can attack and block and has Death Touch, and B, she's a permanent, namely one who can be brought back into play over and over again with Marchesa, giving her long-term value over the course of the game. Marchesa's job of keeping things coming back from the graveyard gets a lot easier if I manage to get Mikaeus the Unhallowed out at the same time. His most important ability is that he gives other non-human creatures I control +1/+1 and Undying. Undying says when this creature dies, if it had no +1/+1 counters on it, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it. When combined with Marchesa's ability, my creatures will return from the graveyard whether they have counters on them or not. Unfortunately, Marchesa herself is a human, so she can't reap the benefits of Mikaeus' ability, which I'm sure is why Wizards specifically made sure that Marchesa was a human character. I should emphasize that the value of +1/+1 counters on creatures in this deck is much more based on outlasting and wearing down my opponents. Letting my creatures live long enough to get huge and then turn them sideways, while a lot of fun, is less of a priority. That said, I do have a couple of specific win conditions. First, I have several sources that deal damage or cause other creatures to deal damage when my creatures come into or leave play. There's Flare of the Hatebound, Warstorm Surge, and Perforos. Perforos is the best since he deals damage to all of my opponents at once, but with Warstorm Surge, I can smack one of my opponents directly with poison counters if I bring in Blightsteel Colossus. So this is an instant kill unless the target can somehow prevent the damage. The more of these burn effects I have out, the better, and Myr Battlesphere and Perforos are a particularly deadly combo as well. The last thing I want to do is just mention some of my other favorites in this deck. So Steel Overseer is an artifact deck staple that taps to put a +1/+1 counter on each artifact creature I control. Always useful, especially here. So is Duplicant, which exiles a creature when it comes into play. Again, highly abusable with either Master Transmuter or Marchesa's recursion capabilities. Taurian Mauler is great to have in any multiplayer red deck, but even more so in one with a +1/+1 counter theme. Toxic Deluge is a board wipe that fits in well with the suicide theme, and I can either save it for when my creatures are bigger than my opponent's creatures so that they survive the wipe, or I can just take out my own board and shrug my shoulders because, hey, they'll just come back anyway. Living Death is the ultimate mass destruction spell in this deck as long as your opponent's decks aren't graveyard-centric, and like Toxic Deluge, it doesn't have to worry about indestructible creatures. Scourge of the Throne is another creature from Conspiracy with Dethrone, and as it turns out, it gets basically double dethroned when Marchesa's out. So not only that, but he untaps your creatures and gives you a second combat phase if you attacked the player with the highest life total that turn. So he has the potential to get huge very, very fast. Moltensteel Dragon is another dragon that fits in this deck like a glove, being an artifact creature as well as an optional source of dealing damage to yourself if you need dethrone triggers. And in the process of pinging yourself, you can give him a power boost for the turn. Ob Nixilis Unshackled is always a source of frustration for my opponents when he's out. He's a 4/4 flying and trample for 6 mana, and if my opponents want to search their library for something even as innocuous as a basic land while he's in play, they have to sacrifice a creature and lose 10 life. And he has considerable synergy with Marchesa since he gets a +1/+1 counter anytime a creature dies. Finally, there's Drana, Liberator of Malakir. She's a 2/3 for 3 with flying and first strike, and when she deals combat damage to a player, you can put a +1/+1 counter on each attacking creature you control. It's worth noting because she has first strike and deals combat damage before any other creatures in this deck, the counters get distributed to the rest of my attacking creatures on that very same combat phase. So that's this deck in a nutshell. It's really fun and swingy and instills fear in your opponents, all things that I love in a commander deck, while still being very technical at times due to the myriad of complex interactions and combos. The latter is good because, as someone who's only been playing Magic for a few years, I enjoy challenging myself and think it helps me to become a better player. So, I also put the full deck list in the description if anyone wants to check it out. What do you guys think? Anyone else out there running Marchesa EDH? What do you like about this one and what would you do differently? I hope you all found this edition of Deck Heads interesting. We do one of these every month. We kind of slacked off last month, but we will be doing one of these every month going forward. And of course, we have a lot of other content as well, so be sure to take a look, like this video, share, subscribe, tell your friends about us, and stay infinite.